In today's lesson on biblical leadership, we will examine three members of King David's leadership team and what sort of legacy they left behind. Like any organization, running an Iron Age kingdom takes work, godly counsel, and the right team members. King David is a well-known biblical figure. In the Bible, we read where God says to Saul in 1 Samuel 13:14, "But now your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." The passage is, of course, referring to David, the man who would be king. What did God mean that David was a man after his own heart? The Hebrew word used here is kilbabo, which refers to the inner man and carries the idea that David would have like desires with God and be in harmony with his intentions. David wanted what God wanted, and he did not hesitate to act. David was a true Renaissance man. He was the paragon of the warrior poet. The women chanted, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s." An accomplished warrior who slew the giant, David was also a skilled musician and the tender-hearted composer of many psalms. "You who are the trust of all the ends of the earth and of the farthest sea, who establishes the mountains by his strength, being girded with might, who stills the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves and the tumult of the peoples. They who dwell in the ends of the earth stand in awe of your signs. You make the dawn and the sunset shout for joy." Regrettably, even the mightiest warrior and the most accomplished artist, a man who desires what God desires, is at his core just a man. Like you and me, David had his faults. It may be that because David's light shone so brightly that his sins cast a deeper shadow. Let us look at three of David's top advisors. Following the transitional types set forth in Boss Like God by Dr. Lynn, we will examine how each member joined David's team. Then we will make observations based on their performance. And finally, evaluate their contributions to David's monarchy. Abiathar was David's priest. His name means abundant father. Abiathar was a Levite, the son of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, son of Phinehas, son of Eli. He was the last Kohen Gadol, or high priest of Israel, from the line of Eli, in fulfillment with the prophecy in 1 Samuel chapter 2. 1 Samuel chapter 21 and 22 relate the story of David on the run from Saul, visiting the priests at Nob. Ahimelech, Abiathar's father, gave David and his men consecrated bread and the sword of Goliath. Saul, upon hearing of the priest's actions, had them slaughtered. Abiathar escaped the culling and fled to David at Keilah, bearing the ephod. Abiathar's position was a family succession to the office of high priest. Abiathar served as David's high priest during his reign, although another priest, Zadok, also bore the title. Whenever Abiathar and Zadok are mentioned together, Abiathar's name is always listed second. Although Abiathar appears to have served David faithfully during his reign, it was when the king was on his deathbed that Abiathar turned against him. David's son, Adoniah, seeing that his father would soon pass, gathered support among the influential people of the kingdom and set himself up to be David's heir. Abiathar backed his play. David, however, chose his son Solomon to reign after him. While Abiathar accompanied Adoniah, Zadok anointed Solomon king of God's people. When Solomon took the throne, he summoned Abiathar and said to him, "Go to Anathoth, to your own field, for you deserve to die. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you were afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted." So Solomon dismissed Abiathar from being high priest to the Lord, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord which he had spoken concerning the house of Eli and Shiloh in 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 26 and 27. Nathan, whose name means given, was David's court prophet. The Bible does not tell us much about the origins of Nathan. though we can safely assume that God placed him in David's court by virtue of his being a prophet of God. The choice of Nathan as prophet was not in the hands of David, making Nathan a good example of an outside hire. Bible readers are first introduced to Nathan in 2 Samuel chapter 7, when David desires to build a house for God. Nathan, in his own wisdom, tells David to go ahead and build the temple. That night, however, God speaks to Nathan and instructs him to tell David that he is not the one to build the house of God. Nathan is then given instructions to proclaim God's covenant with the house of David. Nathan's deference to the will of God shows his humility and willingness to obey. Nathan was a godly advisor who proclaimed the message of God to David without reservation. No doubt many of David's advisors flattered the king with well-chosen words and flowery compliments. Nathan, however, had a way of telling David what he needed to hear clearly. Nathan's confrontation of David after his adultery with Bathsheba and the subsequent murder of her husband Uriah was a masterful display of wisdom and resolution. Using a parable to move David's emotions, Nathan poleaxed him with the revelation that David was the one who acted wickedly. Nathan's legacy is such that he was honored by those who knew him and has been remembered by those who have come after him. He went on to serve in the court of Solomon. David and Bathsheba named one of their sons after the prophet. It is recorded in 1st and 2nd Chronicles that Nathan wrote a book. While that book has never been identified, it is possible that it is included in the scriptures, perhaps in the books of Samuel. Joab was the general of David's military forces. "The Lord is my father" is the meaning of his name. Joab is a complex character in the biblical narrative. Hero or villain, Joab was a man of strong passions and decisive judgments. Though the Bible does not tell us exactly when Joab joined David's organization, it was most likely when David was at the cave of Adullam. 1 Samuel 22:1 says, "So David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's household heard it, they went down there to him." Joab was David's nephew, the son of his sister Zeruiah. David was still a young man at this time, and we don't know the age difference between David and Joab. But David was the youngest male child of Jesse. Joab was certainly spry enough to run for his life when David died at an old age. Joab was promoted to general over the army when he found a way into the city of Jebus, or Jerusalem. This was an inside promotion. His list of military accomplishments is impressive. He won the battle with Abner and Ishbaal's forces at Gibeon with a decisive victory. He achieved victory over Edom, won a battle against the Ammonites and Arameans when surrounded, captured the city of Rabbah, put down Absalom's rebellion, and dealt wisely with the woman at Abel. Despite Joab's military prowess, he was not listed among David's famous mighty men, though this could be because he was the commander of David's forces. Joab was a violent man who was not afraid to commit murder when it served his purposes. Besides helping David in his plot to murder Uriah, Joab killed 3 men against the wishes of King David. Abner, Saul and Ishbaal's general, joined David. Joab, seeking revenge for the death of his brother, killed Abner. He also killed Absalom, the rebellious son of David, and his own first cousin, Amasa. When Adoniah made his move for David's throne, Joab joined him in the attempted coup. In spite of Joab's many evils, there were times when he showed surprisingly wise insight. He was able to convince David to allow Absalom to return after he was exiled. He convinced David to reconcile with the people after Absalom's death and advised against David's forbidden census. Because of his support of Adoniah's claim to the throne, as well as his tendency to murder his rivals, David advised Solomon to not let Joab go to Sheol in peace. When the news that Solomon had executed Adoniah reached Joab, he fled to the tent of the Lord and took hold of the horns of the altar. It was there that Benaiah cut him down and became the general of Solomon's army. At the end of David's reign, we see that even a man after God's own heart can make many mistakes as a leader. Nathan, the prophet chosen by God, went on to follow the Lord and produce good results, while Abiathar was exiled to live the rest of his life in shame as the defrocked high priest of Israel. Joab died at the end of a sword, as did his former rivals. The lesson to be learned from David's leadership team is to seek wise counsel from the Lord in the advisors that he chooses. Draw close to the Lord and wait on him.